chefs of Reddit. What's one rule of cooking amateurs need to know? I worked in a kitchen for a year and a line cook always tasted to make sure it was good. Even if he cooked a dish a million times he would. Our farm manager had to manage the kitchen for 1 week. He comes in one day to our cook tasting food and loses his shit. Tells the guy to stop stealing company food and that he'll be fired if he does it again. Cook tries to explain why he does it and why it's important. Farm manager doesn't want to hear any of it. 2 days later same manager comes back and complains that a certain dish doesn't taste as good as it did before. It was a no-shit Sherlock moment for that cook and a reason to never let the farm manager near the kitchen again. Edit: FA equals front of house. I have a container of lemon pepper, which is pepper and salt infused with lemon flavor. It actually has more salt than pepper, but I think it's marketed as pepper because a lot of home cooks avoid salt, to the detriment of flavor. I have relatives who refuse to add any salt at all to their dish, but they use lemon pepper because they don't read the content label and treat the spice as a magic flavor enhancer. It's not that magic. This one's kind of common sense, but hotter doesn't mean faster. Turning your burners up to 10 for everything will just lead to smoke and half-cooked food with a burnt exterior. Edit: after seeing the responses, I wanted to add an additional note. High heat isn't a devil that should always be avoided. Like some people have intimated, high heat can and should be used when appropriate, especially if you know how to control your heat on a stovetop by moving the pan itself on and off the heat and keeping the food moving constantly. This tip was meant more for the folks that just crank the burner to 10 for literally everything and wonder why their grilled cheese is charred black on the outside and not melted on the inside. A big part of this is because cooking shows tend to put the heat higher. The directors feel as if the sizzling and smoking is more appealing to the viewer. People like Alton Brown, Rachel Ray and Michael Simon have commented on this many times. However, you generally want the heat a couple notches below what you see on the shows. In fact, an episode actually takes several hours to film. The food you're seeing is made by chefs in a separate location. That's why the food doesn't appear burned. It's made by someone else and repeatedly replaced between takes. Also, don't be afraid to poke and prod at it. I feel like people think the process is sacred and you can't shape/flip/feel/touch things while you cook them. The more you are hands-on, the more control you have. Edit: a few people have pointed out that no, this does not include situations where you are trying to sear something. Ever try flipping a chicken thigh early? That's how you rip a chunk out of it and leave it glued to the pan until it's burned. It hurts how true I know this. My dad is a head chef and a damn good one at that. My entire life until 12 years old was practically devoid of a father figure. He was never home. Our Christmas Day was on the 26th and it was the one day I got to look forward to, not for the presents or the food or the whatever else, but it's the day I got to properly see and speak to my dad, where I could go in the back garden and kick a football around or play catch or just sit and talk. My dad's job was what kept our life moving due to us being less well off than others, but caused my mom to become so lonely and depressed at her own life, loving someone who seemingly was never able to be around. Getting home when she was asleep and leaving the house before she was awake caused her to break down. They eventually separated because of it. I despised my mom for separating with my dad because he became my icon, someone who I know now doesn't live up to my expectations cause he's human, and despite never being home, I gave him such an adoration and respect, it hurt my mom and him even more. There was a happy end to the story though. My dad moved and got a job working at a school as a caterer. He said many times it isn't as flattering and doesn't pay nearly as much and the work isn't the challenge he wanted when he decided cooking as his career. But his hours are 8-4 and he can spend time with his now fiancée. He can see me and my sister and, if I had to be honest, my parents separating was the best thing that has ever happened to my family. Until COVID. My sister and I saw him every 2 weeks, spending every other weekend at his place, and now after COVID, while we see him less, we've decided instead to go do some fun things. We've seen Bletchley Park, gone on long hiking walks and been to zoos, all sorts of things. My relationship with my mom is also great. She got a new partner as well. There is a moral to this story though. It will hurt you and the people around you if you become good in the industry. You'll make good money, but as Vote Marvel said, you won't have a social life. Really think about what size you're cutting your vegetables in relation to cook time. It's better to have a perfectly cooked larger vegetable that you have to use fork and knife a bit to eat at the table than a bunch of overcooked, mushy bite-sized pieces. Generally speaking, the best simple preparation of cooking a vegetable is usually roasted on a sheet pan with olive oil, S&P, and for God's sakes, make your own salad dressings fresh. It takes no time. You likely have what you already need in your pantry and it tastes 10x as good as the crap in the bottle. You'll be surprised even how much better ranch dressing tastes if you get the dry seasoning packets and mix it with some fresh milk and mayo and let it set for 30 minutes in the refrigerator. But a roommate learned this the hard way. Used our largest pan to heat up some oil to cook chicken. Went to watch an episode of Family Guy while it was heating up. Not sure how he thought that was a good idea from the start. Came back to a pot of flaming vegetable oil. I was in another room studying for a test when I heard him yell, "Oh shit." He was gonna try to walk the pan of flaming oil outside to dump it since we didn't have a lid for this pan. Ended up spilling a little bit of the molten oil on his hand and dropped it all over the carpet and ignited the carpet. Another roommate ended up grabbing the Brita from our fridge and threw it at the fire, and it luckily extinguished the carpet. Guy had second-degree burns on his hands and we never got our security deposit back. Could have been worse though. Thus, I will always have a box of baking soda at the ready from now on. I would like to raise an issue I have read in your comment. I really like that you said this as it is very important. However, using a fire extinguisher will not only ruin whatever you have cooking and anything else you have cooking but also destroying your stove. No matter what type of stuff extinguisher you use, it will call for either a professional clean or a replacement stove. So instead perhaps use a fire blanket. It will not only put out the fire more efficiently but it will also save your food that you are cooking and your stove. But thank you for posting this comment because I feel like it is not known enough. Patience, planning, and good organization. Patience/planning. Brine your chicken. Let the rice dry before you make fried rice. Slow cook your meats. Overall, the actual time you invest is about the same, but it requires some foresight. Don't expect to just grab a chicken breast out the freezer and be able to make a delicious meal in 20 minutes. A lot of the best dishes take some time to let the flavors do their work. Organization. It's a lot more enjoyable when you can focus on cooking instead of digging around for things you need or clearing space on your counter. Have a good set of glass Tupperware to save leftovers. Get stackable matching cookware that's easy to manage and store. Ziploc bags are great too. These things pay for themselves in giving you general sanity and making it more likely you will consume your leftovers and always have things in their place. Mandolin story time. I had one of those adjustable mandolins and I never really used it. It was gifted to me. Well, I wasn't told that the wing nut that holds the blade in place tends to come loose after a few slices. I was in the middle of slicing zucchini and the nut completely came loose mid-swipe, opened up, and I came down onto the blade with my middle finger knuckle. The force of it split the skin wide open and I saw my bone for a second before the cut filled with blood. I should have gotten stitches, but I was hard-headed and didn't. It took forever to heal. It kept splitting open and even after the skin healed, the bone had a chip in it from the blade. A little calcium started to build up and now I have a little lump of bone on top of that knuckle. Took about 5 years for it to stop hurting when I'd accidentally bump it into something. TLDR, don't fuck around with mandolins, they're dangerous as fuck. I've had the great fortune of knowing some pro cooks in my life, and the most memorable piece of advice I've gotten was when there were several of them at my place during a housewarming and they had, of course, taken over the kitchen. One was searing a pork loin and was pissy because I had a liquor dispenser top on my olive oil and just a grinder for salt. No pig. After he ripped the top off the oil and found my box of kosher salt, he explained. "Dirtimic. Do you know why restaurant food tastes so good?" he asked. while liberally dumping oil and salt on the pork. It's because we cook like we hate you. Turns out the best home cooking aid is self-loathing. Not a professor chef. Mashed potatoes, not blended potatoes. Don't ever put potatoes in the blender, it will turn into glue. For anyone wondering the science behind it, potatoes contain a lot of starch. Mashing cooked potatoes gently by hand or with a ricer leaves most of the starch molecules intact. The butter and dairy you add to the mashed potatoes are able to coat each individual particle, making the potatoes creamy. Honestly, that movie taught me the connection between smell and taste. It legitimately bumped up my cooking skills after watching it, and with those skills, I got excited and would just create shit out of nowhere. Like, why not thin slice potatoes, fry them in a pan, grab a random spice, throw it in and just smell my way through whatever would complement that smell. It was glorious. I could walk into any kitchen and just make a random dish with random ingredients. It was exciting. I loved it. A few years on, I'm a bit more tired after work, but when the pantry is low and the next day is grocery day, I'll still give it a good try. I hate it when people do this. I'm usually enjoying the meal that's apparently imperfect, and occasionally I'll start to notice the slight dryness they're apologizing profusely about or whatever. It was better before they said anything, not to mention the conversation. I've also found that food tastes better when other people cook it. I think when you make it yourself, you are immersed in the smells and flavors while making it so much that it becomes a bit boring or the flavor fades over time. Also, you're so aware of the mistakes and imperfections in the meal, the alteration you had to make to save it from disaster, that no one else knows about. So it's good to step away from the kitchen for a bit between making and serving. Drink some wine, and distance yourself from the dish for a few minutes at least. Then you'll probably enjoy it as much as your family, guests. I'm not going to be able to hold myself to one rule. Sorry, not sorry. Mise en place. It's French for putting in place or something like that. It means before you start the actual cooking, get everything you'll need for the whole recipe out on the counter, do all your prep work, measuring amounts, chopping onions, peeling potatoes, seasoning meat, greasing pans, whatever the recipe says, and put it all within arm's reach of where you'll be cooking. As you become more experienced, you'll get a feel for what can wait to be done during downtime mid-cooking, but even then this is just less of a hassle. Don't rely on a single recipe. If you want to try to make something you had at a restaurant and Google chicken a la whatever, don't just randomly pick one of the results to try. Read a few of them and cook the one that comes closest to being the average of all the others. Way too many internet recipes aren't actually tested by the authors, and professionals are actually worse than amateurs about it. They are used to eyeballing measurements because they know what the right amount looks like, and when they write it down it's all guesswork. Fat, salt, sour, bitter. If it's bland, add some fat. If it's still bland, add some salt. If it's still bland, add some vinegar or lemon juice. If it's still bland, add some herbs and spices or green vegetables. This is even something you can do late in the cooking process to fix a recipe that's turning out boring. Just remember that a little goes a long way. Also, there are magic ingredients that combine several of these at once. For example, olive oil is very fatty and slightly bitter. Cheese is very fatty, moderately salty, and slightly sour. Soy sauce is very salty and slightly bitter. Citrus zest is very bitter and moderately sour. Measure by weight, not volume. This is more for baking than cooking. Baking is very sensitive to small changes in the ratio of different ingredients, and you'll have a lot easier time getting it right if you use a scale. Flour is especially problematic. If you scoop up a cup of freshly sifted flour and level it off, so you have exactly a cup, then spend a couple of minutes slightly taping it on the countertop and shaking it from side to side, it'll settle and pack more tightly, and the exact same amount of flour will only take up 3/4 of cup. Don't play that game, just weigh it and be done. If the recipe says 1 cup of flour, use 130 grams. Bonus, weighing stuff means you don't have to wash a bunch of funny shaped measuring cups and spoons. To add to this, The only kitchen item you really need to put in some money for is the knife. Victorinox is a pretty decent brand for the price, and anything cheaper isn't really gonna get that sharp or maintain its edge. To maintain the edge, first and foremost straighten it after every other use. This takes no more than 5–10 seconds after some practice. Then send your knife to a knife sharpener whenever you feel it's getting worse. How often you need to send them is almost impossible to answer, and kind of the same as how often should I go to the hairdresser. I've heard some people like to do it every other month, but I use my knives almost every day and feel no need to send them in more than once a year tops. Scraping cutting boards, storing them in a drawer, or cutting bones will need more frequent sharpening. Peer-reviewed research referenced in this video does not appear to fully support this commonly parroted advice. According to Dr. Selena Wang, food science and tech at UC Davis, and the case put forth by Adam Raguzzi, AVU is actually among the most stable and healthiest common cooking oils at high temperatures. According to Wang, the smoke point of an oil does not directly correlate with its chemical stability at high temperatures, and AVU is resilient to some of the worrisome health detriments that can coincide with the molecular breakdown of higher smoke point oils at similar temperatures. The latter half of the video is admittedly more subjective, but, in my view, Adam makes a solid enough case for why the culinary effects of AVU at high temperatures are not substantial enough to be a practical consideration. From the culinary standpoint, it seems to be more of a matter of preference for what you want your oil to taste like, and if smoke is or is not a considerable source of frustration, especially if one's kitchen is not well ventilated. But concern about particularly burnt or bitter flavors resulting from cooking AVU doesn't seem to be hugely practical. Taste everything, for reals, everything. I tell my cooks to do this because you start building up a database in your head of flavors. I will legit taste raw garlic, turmeric, horseradish, rice wine vinegar, fish sauce, cumin, etc., as well as all my cooked dishes. That way I know how to fix dishes or know exactly what to add to it to make it complete. You should also study cuisines. Don't know how to make something Thai? Well, if you study the culture you would know that they use coconut milk, turmeric, lemongrass, kaffir lime, etc. Don't know traditional Mexican food? Well, they usually use chili peppers, a wide variety, corn, chocolate, almonds, cilantro, tomatoes, etc. You can use these ingredients to make something inspired by those cuisines. It also makes you more knowledgeable about food and where it comes from. Former executive sous chef for a 3-star restaurant. I have also ran a bunch smaller kitchens during COVID. Get good knives. I recommend Mercer Renaissance as a starter brand. $40 for the 8 inches chef's knives, $23 for the 5 inches utility knife. Shallots are used extremely often in restaurant kitchens but rarely at home. Use as a substitute for onions for a more mild taste. Heat pans for 1 minute before using. Use less heat when cooking. Rarely will you ever need to go higher than 75%. Taste everything possible, not just your finished product. Taste the spices, salt, pepper, etc. all separately before adding them the first time you use it. A lot of people will buy a new spice then immediately add it to their food, ruining it. Knives should be lightly honed before and after each use. Hand wash and dry immediately. Never attempt to catch anything that's falling. Not just knives. If you drop a napkin, your instinctive response should be to take a step back and put your hands up and out of the way. Want to make something more like a restaurant? Odds are you need more salt, sugar, or butter. We don't care if the carrot we serve are worse than eating actual candy. We just want you to come back. I am not a chef, but have cooked for a living for many years. You can learn to cook better by simply making food. Even if you are following a recipe, you can and will get to know food over time. Cooking is an art and science, but is also not hard unless you are making complex things. I might do this, but I share a secret of mine. Mac and cheese. Literally take a craft box, cook the noodles, add a whole lot of cream cheese and the cheese packet comes with. It is significantly better than milk could ever hope to make it. Add things that you think might be good for that recipe and take note of what it does to the taste. You can take exact measurements, but I don't. If you want a vegetable, onions aside, to brown, Don't add salt until it's brown. If you want meat to brown crust, you better make sure it's good and goddamn dry before it hits the pan. If you want to replicate the chicken or beef from your local Chinese takeaway, texture-wise, anyway, there's a very easy way to do it. Just massage with baking soda and let it sit for an hour or so in the fridge. There's a more proper and complex system involving egg whites, called silking, but bicarbonate works just fine in a pinch. If you don't understand how to season, buy one of the following: Lori's Seasoning, Tony Shashir's Cajun Seasoning, Tajin Chili/Lime, Jansel Valley Garam Masala. Bonus points: a few jars of better than bouillon. Your taste buds will appreciate it. If you burn your first pancake just a little, don't turn down the heat. Your pans hold some heat and the first cake should end up getting a hotter cook than those to follow. Just leave it be and everything to follow will be consistent.